Welcome to the NNJR Trackside Classroom series on YouTube. My name's Bill Gilbert. I'm one of the NNJR chief instructors, and I'd like to welcome you to today's class where we're going to talk about car balance. This is a class really designed for solo and advanced drivers, although if you're a student driver, you may pick up some tips, but really, I'm really focused on those of you with the experience on track. And of course, car balance can mean lots of things, but one way to think about it is just, am I comfortable with the car? Is it doing what I want it to do? Because the reverse of that, of course, is if the car doesn't feel comfortable, if it doesn't do what I want it to do, something's wrong. So that's sort of the downside, I guess, if you will. But let's dive in. So car balance. First, the normal disclaimer. We're going to talk about some techniques and tips here today that we hope you'll find useful, but you use them at your own risk. So here's some definitions and examples about balance. Vic Elford, who some of you may know, was a terrific driver back in the day and recently passed away. Said in his book about driving and his talks that I heard, said it's all about balance. He said that was more important than any other aspect of driving the car. And here's some quotes about how professional drivers are rarely in a hurry. They're smooth flowing transitions, those kinds of words. So what determines car balance? Well, obviously car setup does. And we're just going to touch on that very briefly today. But I have some material in the appendix that if you think your car setup needs help, that will give you a nice cookbook for how to go about improving it. That didn't work the way it was supposed to. Next, the track or car conditions can affect car balance. Obviously, a wet versus a dry track or a hot versus cold track may affect car balance. And last, and not least, but first, are driver inputs. So what the driver does can affect the car balance, frankly, more than anything else, unless the car really is set up very, very poorly. So let's dive in. First, car setup. The good news is modern Porsches are set up very well, by the Porsche engineers. And so if you just have any, modern Porsche, for that matter, a Porsche from 30 years ago, it's set up pretty well. And partly as a result of that, most cars that come to a DE event have very good handling. And so balance, may not be perfect, but you might take a pro to find out. And to that point, as the slide says, at some point, any car is going to have some kind of a handling issue. But if I as a driver, am not good enough to feel the handling issues, then focus on the driving. Car is immaterial at that point. And second, even if you can feel them, you can't really come to a good judgment unless you're driving in a very, very consistent fashion. And then if you are, you can start with a diagnosis of, okay, I'm driving well. The car isn't doing what I want. Is it consistently understeering? Is it consistently oversteering? Or maybe it's doing both in different parts of the corner. Anyway, there's a lot more on this in the appendix. So you'll have the slides and the references to some great Ross Bentley material on that. Because today I want to move on to other things that affect the car balance, and mainly the driver, but we'll talk briefly here about track conditions. Now, obviously, again, like I said before, rain versus wet, cold versus warm, those are pretty obvious if they're extreme, but they're much more subtle track conditions that we think about less. And the ambient temperature might be it might be 60 degrees in the morning and 80 degrees in the afternoon. We may not think about that difference, but it does make a difference. And track temperature is not quite the same, because if it's 60 in the morning and 80 in the afternoon, but it's all clouds, that's different than a day where the sun is out, right? The track's going to be much warmer on a day with the sun out. And of course, tires on the car make a big difference. Are they brand new? Are they worn? How many heat cycles, depending on the tire you're running. And then the weight of the car. Modern cars weigh quite a bit, but if you have a passenger or not makes some difference. If you have a full tank versus a quarter of a tank, those things make subtle differences that you need to be aware of. And the point I really want to make here is that that all of these track conditions or car conditions have to be addressed by the driver. And so now we're going to talk about car balance as affected by the driver. And to do that, the term I want to introduce is weight transfer. For those of you who are engineers, it's technically load transfer, but I'm going to call it weight transfer. All cars move weight around. I'm going to show that in a minute, but moving it suddenly is a bad thing. Weight needs to move smoothly and once. So, and the reason, well, there's a couple of reasons. If we move weight suddenly, what happens if we turn the steering wheel suddenly into a corner and load up the outside in a rapid fashion? If we do it too fast, we've compressed those springs, they're going to push back, right? Whereas if we load them up gently and smoothly, they're going to stay compressed. And that's why the only once is here. And the other point here, which is more subtle, less load transfer is better. And the reason is the graph that you see here, that yes, traction is proportional to weight, but not 100%. It's not a 1-for-1. The more weight you put on the tire, the less grip. And so when you're cornering, yes, the outside tires gain grip, but the inside tires lose more. Same thing in braking. The front tires gain grip, but the rear tires lose more grip. And so if we can drive well with somewhat less weight transfer, we're going to have more grip and be able to go faster. So we're all aware that when we corner or brake, we move weight, right? We move weight forward when we brake, we move weight to the side when we corner. But we often don't think about how much weight that really is. So here's some rules of thumb, that when we corner, we're moving about 30% of the car's weight. When we're braking, we're moving about 20%. So think about that. We're moving 1,000 pounds around on a 3,000-pound car. I mean, that's a huge amount of weight. When we brake, we're putting an extra 300 pounds on each front tire. And by the way, we're taking 300 pounds off of each rear tire. That's a lot. Cornering's even more. 500 pounds on each one of those outside tires. So think about that next time you turn the steering wheel on the track. You're moving 1,000 pounds from one side of the car to the other. And when I first went through this math, I was a bit astounded. I mean, it's an amazing amount of weight that we're moving around with the steering wheel and the brake pedal. So here's some basics. Many of you have heard this stuff before, but I'm going to repeat them just quickly here before I add some things to them. So basics for steering and shifting: turning the steering wheel progressively so that the car takes a set. Again, we want to load the springs so they don't bounce back. Knowing where center is, being smooth at the winding and unwind, stuff that you can practice every day when you're driving to work or wherever. Shifting, same thing. each shift upsets the car. So learn to do it the right way. Three motions in every gear shift. Out of gear, across the gate, into gear with 2 or at most 3 fingers. If you drive a car with a stick, you can practice that every day. Here's some basics on braking. This is the hardest part of balance for most of us. And, we want to move our foot smoothly, heel on the floor, smooth but hard initial pressure. So, I often tell beginners, put your foot on the brake, feel pressure, then push hard. More recently, I've been saying 1, 2, meaning 1 on the brake pedal and then 2 really hard on the brake pedal. So it's, and we're doing that so that first 1 is transferring weight without pitching the car forward. Once that weight is transferred, now we can really, hit the brakes hard. And we do in modern Porsches have to hit the brakes hard, but if we just jam them on, it's not going to work either. And of course, brake release is the reverse. That needs to be very gentle. We all know brakes on the track are setting our entry speed. They determine the car attitude, and in particular, the end of braking and what we're doing with the brakes in the first part of a corner after turn-in is where the magic happens, right? We all know that. And we've all seen the Mario Andretti quote about how too many drivers think the brakes are for slowing the car down. So, how to think about whether your car is balanced or not. Well, here's a few things to think about. One is, how close to the limit are you? If you're not close to the limit, it's probably immaterial, right? You're not pushing the car hard enough to really know. But if you are, approaching the limit, do you know? Can you feel, if the car is understeering or oversteering, or doing both at different times? Maybe it's understeering early in the corner and oversteering later in the corner. So how do you know that? And most importantly, do you know if PSM's intervening? I mean, some drivers drive routinely with PSM intervening and aren't aware of it. I hope you're not one of those, but we see that too often. So some things to think about. Sensing the car, where it's at, understeer, oversteer, is a learned skill. And here's one way we can do that. Besides practice on a skid pad and all the rest of that, we can do sensory input sessions when we're at the track. We can take a session where we focus just entirely on what sounds do we hear. We can do another session where we just focus on our seat of the pants and what are we feeling in the car, and so on. This is a great way to heighten your sense of exactly how well balanced is the car, how sharply does it reply to my commands, and so on. Now let's briefly talk about understeer, and then we'll talk about oversteer. So here's some common causes of understeer, driver causes, I should have said on the title, I guess here. You can have not enough weight on the front tires. If we pop our foot off the brakes, right after turn-in, and the car doesn't want to turn, that's driver-induced understeer because of jumping off the brakes. And there's lots of examples I could have used here. Watkins Glen, turn 1, the keyhole, or turn 6 at Mid-Ohio, Lime Rock, the left-hander, or turn 1. So, and there could be a long list, right? I mean, this is you might think of as a beginner mistake, but it's not, because the slide says abrupt brake release, but it can be not quite that dramatic. Now, a different type of driver-caused understeer is just too much gas too soon, and that again, that can happen. And my favorite example of that is the tow at Watkins Glen, where it's very easy. We're very tempted because of the hill to want to get on the gas, but oftentimes we get on the gas and the car immediately washes out. The front end washes out, meaning understeer, because the car hasn't fully turned, to make the apex, and or at least the proper line, and plenty of other examples that you see on the slide here. So these are things to really be aware of. We can also have driver-induced understeer by simply turning the steering wheel too quickly or too much. Turn one at Mid-Ohio is an example, turn one at Watkins Glen is an example. And there are plenty of other places where this could happen. So again, if you feel like the car is understeering, think about this, because here's how we fix understeer. Probably more or longer trail braking, a smoother brake release, a smoother turn in, maybe a more progressive turn in. But regardless, if you feel the car is understeering, you have to turn into a detective and figure out, well, why isn't there enough weight on the front tires at this point? There's some reason the car is not doing what you're asking it to do, and time to figure that out. Let's talk about oversteer, same way. Driver-induced oversteer. Too much trail brake, a very common one. That can happen in almost any corner. If we go in on too much brake, too deep, and not enough weight on the back's gonna feel nervous or worse. Obviously, if we lift and the car isn't straight, the car is going to oversteer. Turn 9 at Mid-Ohio, the car's not straight where we want to brake. If we brake too hard there, the back end can get light. If you get on, if for some reason you're on the brakes too much or way too deep, in the middle of the corner, the car is going to get light. And then power-induced oversteer, that can happen on almost any corner with a powerful car. If you get on too much gas too soon, the back end's gonna step out. So how do we fix that? Well, with the exception of the last one, probably less trail braking, not always, but probably. Smoother brake release, more progressive steering input, being aware of when and how much we get on the gas. But again, we got to be a detective. Why isn't there enough weight on the back of the car in this case? Now, just to summarize on understeer and oversteer, I love the way Randy Popes talked about it. His comment was understeer is slow, but oversteer is scary. So, be aware when you're thinking about, your own driving and car setup and so on. Those most drivers would agree with those assessments. So to summarize, balance is all about moving weight around where and when you choose to, because again, we're talking about weight transfer, talking about being smooth with how the controls are used. It's determined by the setup of your car, by the track and car conditions, but most importantly for most of us, by our inputs to the car. So my summary, your car is probably set up pretty well, but be aware of these large amounts of weight that you're moving around on track, and that you're the one that's determining how much and how fast. That if you improve that weight transfer, you're going to improve traction, you're going to have better balance. And if you're not feeling like the car is properly balanced, then you've got to become a bit of a detective to solve that. So any questions, feel free to send me an email. Feel free to talk to me at the track. I look forward to seeing you there. There is an appendix here with car setup information, which I encourage you to use if you're at all interested in that topic. So with that, thank you very much for watching. I look forward to seeing you at the track and on the next one of these trackside classrooms. Have a good day.